Also, welcome to this event from my side. My keynote is entitled Towards a Unified, Modular, Trusted and Connected Identity Ecosystem. And here I try to lay out how I think a future identity and access management might look like. This is my perspective, but feel free to contradict, to ask questions, whatever you think is appropriate when I do my presentation here. So to have a quick look at the agenda as I planned it for today, I'm looking at different aspects that combine together to that what I then think is this unified, modular, trusted and connected identity ecosystem. I start out with the drivers, and I think that this has clearly moved to the business. I want to quickly explain why unified, modular, trusted and connected, and that has a look at the changing types of identities that we're looking at. I want to look at different levels of trust and sovereignty. Of course, the topic of decentralized identity, and we had a specific event just for that topic recently. And the summary will be a way moving towards this ecosystem and a quick summary. And since these are a lot of slides, I have to start now and speed up. So first of all, the many drivers as one of the components that I want to talk about. First of all, the business is at the core, and this is of importance for me because the role of IAM has changed dramatically in the years, since the early 90s. We have new identities, and the pandemic, we still have to mention it again and again, has put a spotlight on what needs to change and what has gone wrong and what needed immediate change. So if we look back to how IAM changed over time, we started out early with looking at administrative efficiency. We tried to speed up processes to make sure that the administrator only does the work that is required and everything else is automatically done. The next step was user experience and convenience. So we moved towards single sign-on, not having to type in your username, password again and again. Next stop was governance, compliance. There were some incidents in the States, and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was one of the first starting points when it came to compliance, governance, regulatory requirements, and laws. And that was reflected within IAM as access requests and approvals, access reviews. So how give I access to the user, who approves it, and who checks it? But on the other hand, when we look at GDPR, also consent and data protection, making sure that the management and the storage and the processing of data is done in a lawful manner. And now we are moving to the era where IAM is one of the main foundations for business, for security and compliance. So we have these three aspects that come well together here. And we have so many different types of business models that IAM has to fulfill and has to work within. So it's B2B, really working with partners, B2C, working with consumers and customers, and even B2B2C when you provide services that your partners provide to their customers. And all of this that is required, federation, adaptive authentication, the paradigm of thinking of IAM services and API ecosystems, tying this all together, these are the building blocks that we need when we talk about that still unified, modular, trusted, and connected identity ecosystem. So it's business enablement. IAM has changed. We still have the employee account, but we go far beyond that. So we have digital identities for everyone and everything, and the lines between employees and all the other identities are actually blurring. The digital services in the digital transformation are the core business, and they build on digital identities. And we at KuppingerCole believe that there is no successful digital business without the IAM done right. And on the other side, that means the IAM enables IT to achieve this business enablement, to make sure that new applications, often now in the cloud as a service, can be onboarded quickly. New groups of users and identities can be quickly onboarded or just added to an existing systems. And just to mention it, DevOps and Agile IT, so the way how we develop systems and how we run systems, they require a modern IAM and PAM, which is not the topic for today. And again, there's also no cybersecurity without IAM. What do I mean by unified, modular, trusted, and connected? We will see that later in some images. But in general, we need to understand that IAM is not a piece of software. It's not a system that you can buy from one single vendor. It's a concept because it integrates and combines services. It provides capabilities under one single umbrella, ideally for an organization, of an overarching ecosystem, and that helps to maintain access for all types of identities to all types of services. And if we think of all these types of identities, if I read out all of this that is on that slide, my 20 minutes will be done already. So I just go quickly across that, and this is still not the full picture. There are more identities to think of, and there will be more in a future IAM. But nevertheless, a very quick walkthrough. We still have the enterprise users with their traditional life cycles. We have external staff, and that are changing as well. So we have still these 6 months external freelancers that stay within the organization. But we are more moving also to quick on and offboarding for a few hours for promoters doing stuff in the consumer market and needing access to a system. We need to quickly on and offboard partners, and they come with their own identities. We don't have to store them anymore. So they are federated and trusted. Again, the word trusted. We need to think of all the clients that we might want to serve. And I use the word clients, the term clients, really on purpose, because that might be consumers, customers, but also subscribers to a service, citizens, patients, whatever you have. And on the right side, there are the non-personal users, so it's devices, and it's not only the corporate-owned device. It might be bring your own device, and again, pandemic has shown that's true. So managed and unmanaged, corporate-owned and bring your own device, personal devices, and even shared devices. Think, for example, of a car or a tablet that is used by more than one user. Things, of course, they might be autonomous, they might be personal, they might be shared. So very different aspects to things, and they need to be represented and reflected and designed within an IAM in a proper way according to their characteristics. So they might be user-specific, or they might be autonomous and they do things on their own and need their identity of their own. And finally, robots and automation. Again, the same concepts. They might be autonomous. They might be acting on behalf of somebody, doing work for me, which would be great. They might be self-learning, robotic process automation. They might be shared or on the shop floor. So all these types of identities are building blocks within our identity and access management. Next stop, levels of trust and sovereignty. I say that there should be a unified, modular, trusted and connected identity ecosystem, to reiterate on that. So we need to understand the levels of trust that there are, and that we make sure that we act upon these different levels of trust and sovereignty. And if we look at the typical way of how identities were managed before, this is not over, as I state here, but it's far from being the complete picture. There will be still centrally managed identities done by HR with an IAM system, but this is losing importance. We have more isolated identities that are in the ownership of the individual user, and that is starting with the consumer and the customer, and has already started. And I expect that also to change for the identities in business. So, as mentioned, we still have the central corporate identities, the traditional way, and it remains important. We have federated, trusted identities. So we have an identity provider, a system, an IAM system that has well-managed identities, and we integrate them within our identity and access management system, so connected and trusted. We have registration and vetting, the traditional onboarding processes, either really using a form and adding in information or building upon social accounts or whatever you have. And on top of that, then vetting and know your customer scenarios. And all these different types of identities, they have different levels of trust associated with them. So we need to make sure that they are trusted at the level that they should be trusted. And finally, mentioned that already, and we go a bit into more detail here as well. Decentralized identities, the self-sovereign identities managed by the users themselves, either really self-managed or through providers of trusted identities with then verifiable credentials. So you make sure that you use an identity and reuse that identity that is provided by, say, your bank, your state, your municipality, your insurer, whatever you have, or an organization like Verimi or the like. And they can provide verifiable credentials so that you can say, I'm of legal age to do something by alcohol as the traditional example, or that you can reliably prove that you're disabled without showing what the disabling is. More decentralized identity. We at KuppingerCole expect that important parts of identity and access management is moving towards decentralized solutions. So they allow that we can store and share verified and self-sovereign identities or parts thereof whenever that is required. And that is reflected in these 5 fundamentals for future identity as one of the building blocks that we want to look at for this unified, modular, trusted, and connected identity ecosystem. We expect that to be more and more important. First, the future of identity is digital. Sounds like a truism, but we need to understand that we are moving away from traditional analog identity verification. If you want to extend your passport during a pandemic, you know that this is not an easy thing to do, at least not in every country. We're moving towards a more private, privacy-forward future of identity. So data is necessary, and we in parallel want to make sure that this information is kept as private as possible, so that we really only disclose the information that is required. So really least privilege also here. The future of identity is user-centric. We put the user into the center of the stage, and the user decides what to do with the identity and what to disclose from the identity attributes that are there. So the user is the common factor, and he or she is in control. And we as providers of services, as companies, we have to adapt because they won't, or they are already doing so. When these identities are user-centric, they should be, and we expect them to be reusable. And that again means connected, modular, trusted. So my surname usually does not change too often. My date of birth, hopefully never. So why should we onboard again and again? So create this identity, create it ideally in a decentralized manner, and share whatever you want to share with individual services that use these data sources, and reuse is the only option. And that means that we are moving more and more towards a decentralized identity subsystem or part or building block or capability where the user holds the identity data, makes sure that they can provide that, they secure it. The mechanisms behind that are designed to secure these data and these identities, and then you can reuse them between identity ecosystems for everything that you want to achieve, authentication and transactions. How do we get there? There is this thinking of IAM being no longer employee IAM anymore. I said it's an umbrella, it's an overarching concept. So we need to make sure that there is an overarching blueprint that achieves what we want to achieve. So controlled and secure access for each identity to every service. And this is a picture that has been talked about in several events of KuppingerCole in the past. So if you are interested in learning more about this identity fabric, there's great material around provided by Martin Kuppinger, by me. I just want to show it, and I want to go into more detail because the idea here is to give all the users to the left access to all the systems that are to the right, to the top, and to the bottom. And in the middle is the identity fabric that achieves what I just described, this unified, modular, trusted, and connected identity ecosystem. So if we drill deeper here, we understand that there's really benefit because this IAM blueprint is as versatile and as generic so that it allows to be compatible with all types of identities, including the external, digital, decentralized identities that I mentioned before. And there's benefit, as I said, there's benefit for the enterprises, really quickly onboard partners, customers, clients. You get better information quality because people take care of the information for themselves. And we have central control, but decentralized identity. So we have best of both worlds. We provide services. And how that will look like will be one of my next slides. And there's, of course, benefit for users. You exert control over personal information. You manage your credentials, hopefully no longer passwords, more securely. You can quickly onboard, log in, exchange information, and control information by enabling pseudonymity, anonymity, and the principle of minimal disclosure. We and you as an organization, we remain in control across all these identity types. This is something that the identity fabric achieves. So if we look at the process, there are different aspects to look at, and these are very simple and very easy to explain, and that shows that we can remain in control of the information that is relevant for us. So the customer, the identity, every of these identities that I mentioned before, they use an authenticator to prove who they are. That might be an app on the iPhone, that might be username, password in a browser, or a certificate somewhere stored in a device. They authenticate towards an IDP, and they use standardized protocols, again, a connected identity ecosystem. These IDPs, they maintain account information, and that could be anybody, Amazon, a social login, your employer, your state, your bank. And they provide you with account details that can be used for specific purposes. And when an identity is authenticated towards an IDP, then it can have access to applications and services. So it can work in business applications as an employee. It can do commerce as a customer. And many other services can be used as well. And if you want more access to this information, this might be integrated in a system of records. That could be something like an HR, a CRM, a customer data platform within CIAM. It could be even your IAM, where your identity record resides. Your identity record for this identity resides. And based on consent and business decisions, you can then say, we use this information for further purposes. And where is control? Here is control. The organization trusts the IDP, authorizes applications, manages the system of records, and leverages this information for further purposes. Final slide, the summary. Very quickly, nothing new on this slide. We have the identity expanding, and we are in a connected world, and we need to make sure that we provide all the identities to all the services that are required, and decentralized identities are on the rise. We think of identity services for digital services. We need to have that this works. We need to have interoperability, standards integration to make this thing work together, connected, interoperable. And in the end, we need an overarching concept, and this is where we think at KuppingerCole this identity fabric is a great way to doing that, but thinking in an abstract, in a unified approach for IAM. And that's it from my side. So back to Annie, if there are any questions. We had a few more questions regarding my opening keynote, the future of IAM towards a unified, modular, trusted, and connected identity ecosystem. And I want to answer them and just read them out and try to dig a bit deeper into the background of these questions. The first question was, when you say identities for everyone, can you talk about non-human identities such as RPA bots? Yeah, of course, RPA bots, of course, means robotic process automation. These are the software products which are acting either autonomously or they act on behalf of a user. And that also defines more or less the relationship of the identities that are used here. If the bot is acting on behalf of the user, there are more than one possibilities. It might be that the user is using, or the robot user is using, an identity which is linked and closely related to the actual entry of the user, so that these working on behalf is reflected also in a kind of ownership or relationship, so that there is also some more or less liability possible between what the robot does, or the process does, and what the actual user would have done. If the user is acting autonomously, they will have their own identity really as a standalone identity, which is really not connected to a human user, so they act as if they were another identity, and then they really have their own life cycle, their own access rights, etc. So that would be something when we talk about non-human identities. A second question is closely related to that, and I read it out. Would you classify or sort identities of service accounts and RPA robots in the employee IDP or in one or many IDPs of their own? There are many answers to that question. First of all, there are two identities thrown together into that question, which I think should be looked at differently. First of all, service accounts. These are technical accounts. These are accounts that represent either a service or a technical user within an IAM system. And usually, from our experience, these service accounts are technical and privileged accounts. And as such, they should be maintained somewhat differently. They should be kept in a privileged access management system so that they have their very special own lifecycle management around them, and also the way how they are accessed should go through a PAM system, maybe a PAM system for integrating into a coding environment, into software development, or really a traditional privileged access management. RPA robots, again, goes back to the answer of my first question. It depends whether they are related to a human user, so they act on behalf of them. They should always be kept separately, not necessarily in a separate IDP, but in a separate logical context. But when they are related to an identity of a human user, of a personalized user, they should be closely related to that. And if they are autonomous, they should be kept separately anyway. It does not mean that they have to be different IDPs. I assume in most cases this will be the case, but nevertheless, as long as they are kept in a separate context, a separate naming context, subtree, whatever you have within your structure, they should not be mixed with personalized human identity users. Third question was if, in my opinion, in the field, so out there in the world, whether policy and regulation, such as eIDAS, pushed the acceptance and implementation of decentralized identity, modern identities, more than the extraordinary powers like the pandemic, or if it is a combination of both that forced the flexibility in a modern IAM ecosystem as I described it. That also is not a simple answer, because it varies from country to country. There are countries where eIDAS has had a very big impact, and where lots of changes have really been triggered by regulations and such trends like eIDAS. In other countries, like in Germany, for example, the elektronischer Personalausweis, the EID card, is something that has not really gained that traction that it should have. And there, this regulation part is not of that importance. When you look at regulations and things like GDPR, that's a different game. Of course, this GDPR as a compliance requirement has changed things dramatically. But to be more frank, I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has had more impact on the changes that we see in identity management right now than anything else. that is surely true. Many organizations had to move towards multi-factor authorization, multi-factor authentication. That was really something that they needed to change immediately just to protect their systems and to get more flexible. Many more cloud services have been used. Another question, how will self-sovereign identities be integrated in the tool landscape? And this is really not simple to answer because self-sovereign identities come with a variety of different concepts, how you get a self-sovereign identity, where it is stored, how it is controlled, how it is authenticated and authorized. At that point, I really would like to recommend reading the Compass documents that my colleague Annie Bailey has provided, because these documents, they look at the different varieties of how this connection could be made and how it is integrated in the tool landscape. When these self-sovereign identities are used for an onboarding process, then this will be usually done through some kind of federation processes or federation protocols. For every other type of integration, there should be really looked into the implementation of the actual self-sovereign identity solution. And that is also very closely connected with the next question: how will self-sovereign identities be reviewed? How is ownership different than non-self-sovereign identities? And the answer here is clear. Self-sovereign means ownership is with the actual user, with the identity, with the holder of the identity. So there is a high importance that this ownership remains with the owner of the self-sovereign identity. When it comes to reviewing these self-sovereign identities, then again, the question is, first of all, how is this self-sovereign identity modeled within the overall IAM concept? If we think back of my presentation, there was a systems of record which combines information from different areas where, for example, the initiating identity would be related with some ghost or shadow identity within the actual identity and access management system, which then augments the self-sovereign identity with runtime information, with history information, with credibility information. In that situation, you will then review more or less this shadow entry. And if there are some changes within the actual self-sovereign identity and this ID, then this should be looked at more closely. In general, I would assume that an organization allowing access via self-sovereign identities apply a risk-based approach that makes sure that they understand what is provided from the outset as the self-sovereign ID, and then add their information at runtime over the lifetime of this identity and review that. So I think that would be an answer for that question, although this is surely not comprehensive. If there are more questions, please get back to me or get back to my colleague Annie. Finally, the identity fabric. The question is, this fabric sounds a lot like Esperanto, great concept, but not easily implemented. That's true. It's not simple. Nevertheless, it's worthwhile doing so because it applies a service-based approach. That is really of importance because then you can separate individual services within your identity and access management and have a close relationship between the services, but you can delineate them very simple. And if you delineate something that is a service, you can either scale it up, scale it down, you can replace it, rip it out and add something else, or you can smoothly transfer from one service to the next or even have them in coexistence. So this service-based approach is the first starting point. And once you have achieved that, then you have not Esperanto, but you have components that talk to each other via APIs, via clearly defined interfaces. And that allows you to create the high-level capabilities, the services on top of that, that are implemented through the individual building blocks that have you within the fabric. We as KuppingerCole are using this identity fabric approach for assessing existing IAM infrastructures and for changing them, for making them more future-proof, for scaling them up, for broadening their scope towards all the identities that I've mentioned within the presentation. And I think that is the beauty of the concept, that makes sure that you can really scale up and rip and replace without interfering with the overall functioning of the overall system, of your identity and access management ecosystem that communicates with services, with identity providers, with external services, and provides services. I think that is the beauty of that. The second part of that question is not fully clear to me, so I really would like to ask the person that raised that question or that issue to get back to me to explain more what is meant. It says that the problem is some of the component requirements have weaknesses that can be exploited. If there are weaknesses, I would assume that they are mitigated, that they are controlled, or the building block is not used and replaced by something else. But maybe I did not get the question right. If there are any more questions, please feel free to get in touch with KuppingerCole.com, with me, mr@KuppingerCole.com for just a mail, or follow me on Twitter and get in touch there via direct messaging. It's M. Reinwart, so get in touch with me.